Well, that's one of the things that I'm interested in trying to reopen, which is that during the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, when obscenity was a much hotter topic, in particular because of the need to establish a standard by which something might be deemed obscene. And there were even people who said we should not have any concept of obscenity legally. It was very much on people's minds that obscenity and the erotic arts were part of free speech. So you had, novels like Lady Chatterley's Lover or Tropic of Cancer that were deemed too racy to be, sold. So you weren't even necessarily talking about films or pictures. Even text was considered too hot to handle. And for whatever reason, that branch of the free speech discussion has somewhat dropped out of most people's consciousness. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I would say so. I definitely think that to some extent it's somewhat there, and I don't know if it's just into different degrees where it's like gay rights or things like that, but definitely nothing really that is necessarily adult related in our XXX community.
Mm-hmm. So one person that you've worked with who has caught my attention on a number of occasions is this man, John Stagliano. And John Stagliano is famous for first porting the concept of gonzo, which was originally popularized by Hunter S. Thompson in journalism, into porn. That is, he abstracted it away from journalism and started bringing it into pornography, in the sense that he was using handheld cameras. He was making use of the switch to VHS from film. And one of the things that he was doing, if I understand correctly, and you should feel free to correct, is that he was showing females enjoying sexuality rather than being spied upon by the lens, actually actively engaged for their own pleasure. And that this was in some weird way a feminist upturning of the concept of pornography. Do I have my facts even vaguely correct?
Yeah, I would say so.
So then John weirdly ran afoul of federal prosecutors having to do with a 1973 standard, which needs to be more in all of our consciousness, called Miller versus California. Is Miller versus California something that occupies your thoughts?
No.
Do you know about it?
No.
Oh boy. Okay. I don't know. Look, I'm not a legal expert, but this is, I think this is still the governing case law. There was originally, I guess you can't check me, but see if this even plays correctly. My understanding is that in 1957, there was a decision called Roth versus United States, which introduced the idea that an average person applying contemporary community standards, whatever that means, would have to find obscene work to be in the prurient interest, that it arouses passions and maybe makes us lascivious, right? And that was followed in the mid-60s by 1966, something called Memoirs versus Massachusetts, which was a much more liberal standard, which said that the work in question had to lack all redeeming social importance. And therefore, if you could just put one quotation from Shakespeare somewhere in your work, you were almost certainly going to be safe, because anything that was redeeming would keep something from being deemed obscene. And then the court revisits in 1973 and comes up with a three-pronged approach. And it says that somebody applying contemporary community standards has to find the work to be in the prurient interest of sex, that it has to run afoul of offensive standards, I think, on the state books, and lastly, it has to be seriously lacking in redeeming scientific, literary, political, or social importance. So not totally lacking, it just has to be fairly lacking. That is terrifying in the age of the internet, because what is a contemporary community standard when we have one giant community? If you make porn in the San Fernando Valley, let's say, where its traditional headquarters has been, What if it gets viewed in Ogden, Utah? How do you know you're not violating somebody else's community standards? Are you worried about this at all?
Oh, I'm definitely. I mean, to me, it's very extreme because what one perspective is to one person is totally different to another. Your life experiences, I mean, are going to be completely different. Even like, religion has a huge play in all of these types of things. And I think that a lot of people just have totally different ideas on what is okay and not okay. And I think a lot of it is even just from lack of experience or perspective or communication with different people. So I think that some people even like many even of my own friends have totally different views on pornography and actors and actresses in the adult entertainment industry. And once they meet them, they're like, wow, I didn't even think that you guys would even, be this type of person. I've had people who like speak to me directly where they're like, I didn't like you until I listened to a podcast where I was like, oh, she's like a real human being. So I think that in general, it's really daunting and terrifying, the fact that if I want to do some really intense hardcore scene that to maybe the general public will think it's, regular hot porno, but then there might be, 5% of the population who's like, oh my God, what did she just do?
Well, and that's just it. There's no way that you can control where your material will be consumed. So having a pre-internet, like almost 50 years old decision govern in part who can be brought up on federal charges. My understanding was that Stagliano about 10 years ago was brought up and was possibly facing 3 decades in prison for making pornography.
Yeah.
You're like 28. That would put you at nearly 60 years old before you got out.
Oh yeah.